Welcome back to Close Up. A robust field of Republicans is seeking the nomination for Congress in the 2nd District, a seat that is viewed as the most competitive it's been in years now that Congresswoman Annie Kuster is retiring. One of the GOP contenders is a retired businessman from the Upper Valley, Bill Hamlin, and he's our guest this morning. Thanks for being here, Bill.
Good morning, Adam. Thank you for having me. I think when we first texted a few months ago, I indicated I needed some time to meet with the people to kind of assess where I fit in this race, and I'm happy to report I've been on the trail for a couple months, and I'm getting a really wonderful reception. Recently, someone said to me in Hillsborough, said, wow, a Dartmouth-trained economist that's an energy expert, why don't we have more people like you in Congress?
So that's a little bit about who you are, and your background is in the field of energy. Why are you running for Congress?
Well, I'm running for a couple of reasons, but most importantly, look, I've been a businessman my whole life, not a politician, not a professor, and in business, you learn how to correct things when they're going wrong. And right now, I think our nation is heading the wrong direction. It's as simple as that. We have open borders, we've got runaway inflation, we've got rising crime, and our economy's in trouble. And as a businessman, I think I have something to offer. Right now, it's easier to be a criminal than it is to be a cop. Right now we've got politicians, they fly around the world in their private jets, and they come back here and they tell us we need to get rid of our gas stoves. They want to tell us what cars to drive, they want to tell us what food to eat. So I think our very way of life is under attack, and I think I can do better. So I want to secure the border, I want to reduce the government spending that is fueling inflation, I want to bring back law and order, and I really want to fix our economy. So those are the basic reasons.
A lot of Republicans running in that CD2 primary. For the average GOP voter out there that is looking for a conservative to take on, it's no incumbent anymore, to try and win this seat, what are your conservative credentials you're bringing to this race?
You know, Adam, I'm a old-fashioned, common-sense conservative, plain and simple. I speak to the people of New Hampshire. I speak to the voters, and I think we have a lot of values in common. I know about hard work. I've been working hard my whole life. I get up at 5 a.m. every morning. I feed the dog. That's the kind of work ethic I have. But with regards to the voters in the 2nd Congressional District, I think what I bring is a depth of expertise in energy. And when I speak to voters, they are very warm to my expertise. We have runaway inflation right now. A lot of that is caused by rising energy prices. So I think I bring something unique and new. I joked when we met the other day that I probably know more about energy than anyone in Congress, and I stand by that. I looked up the House members on the House Committee of Energy and Commerce, and Annie Kuster's on that committee. Annie Kuster doesn't know much about energy, and I guarantee you I know more than most people in Congress about energy, and I would also guarantee you I know more about energy than anyone running in CD2. So I look forward to bringing my knowledge to the voters of CD2.
Let's dig into that expertise in a moment, but first, how important to you is this concept of loyalty to Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee? Obviously, there are some people in Congress who see it as their job to defend him from political and even legal threats. Do you see your role that way if you were to be elected?
Adam, you know, on that, again, I'm a common sense conservative, and I think I go back to Ronald Reagan's view on this. Ronald Reagan said, if you agreed with him on 80% of the issues, you were a friend and an ally and not a 20% enemy. So that's how I view Donald Trump. But I will say this, when Donald Trump was president, our country was safer, our adversaries weren't attacking us, and we know, and the economy was much better. Under Joe Biden in 3.5 years, he's really destroyed this country. We have rising crime, we have runaway inflation, and people are hurting. And so I think when it comes to Donald Trump, we know we were safer when he was president. So I look forward to him being president again.
The criminal cases against Trump, he has a felony conviction now. Is he in any way responsible for himself for the predicament he's in?
Well, I fundamentally believe nobody is above the rule of law. That's the foundation of our democracy. But I think what we're witnessing is persecution, not prosecution. They're finding the man, they know the man, and they're finding the crime. And I think when I talk to people, one of the things they fear, justice is supposed to be blind. and this lawfare attack on President Trump, I think it's energizing his base because people feel and understand how unfair it is, and I think it's a symptom of a greater evil that's permeating our democracy right now.
Let's get into that energy policy. What is the best way that Congress can lower costs for the average American?
Good question, and some pretty easy answers. I think there's three things: infrastructure, right? Rules and regulations, and finance. When it comes to infrastructure, you look at the Keystone Pipeline that was canceled. That's an easy one to get going again. But President Biden put a moratorium on export facilities of natural gas from the Gulf Coast. That natural gas could come right to New England. That could feed New Hampshire. And so I think we need to free up our infrastructure. Rules and regulations. President Biden put in about 90 rules and regulations to hinder domestic oil and gas production. And I think we can unwind those very easily. And then when it comes to finance, these ESG initiatives that have been pushed, they are starving our domestic producers of cash. So I think infrastructure, finance, rules and regulations. But more than that, something I can offer is an expertise in oversight. Right now, with the Green New Deal, we're spending trillions of dollars on green energy. And nobody knows where this money is going. It's fueling inflation. But I look forward to, to going to Washington and digging into where this money's going. No one can pull the wool over my eyes. I know energy, I know infrastructure, and right now I smell a rat. Even with the Biden administration's approach here, energy production hit a new peak domestically last year. Why is that? Even with that cap on it, if you will. Well, that's a good question, and one of the reasons why production is up is because the price is up, and the price is up because we're restricting it. And instead of buying oil from our domestic producers and natural gas, we're buying from Iran and Venezuela. So I think we've got it completely wrong. I think with a little bit of encouragement, domestic producers can produce even more. Would you support a new pipeline coming through your district here in the 2nd District? Obviously, it was controversial about a decade ago. The Northeast Energy Direct went down. A lot of people in CD2 opposed it. You know, Adam, over coffee on Saturday mornings, I occasionally search up and look at the maps of New Hampshire, where we get our energy, where it comes from. And no, I would not support a new pipeline. We've got plenty of existing infrastructure, but I think if we want to build a more resilient grid, there are things we can do. I think we could build additional storage capacity on existing sites, for example. And again, I think we could free up more natural gas from the Gulf Coast that could move up to New England. So I think there's easy things we can do without building giant new projects in New Hampshire. What is your position on abortion? My position on abortion, it's very simple. Look, first of all, I think it's important that we approach this topic with an appropriate amount of compassion for the young women that find themselves involved. As the father of 2 girls, aged 20 and 22, I support the existing laws of the state of New Hampshire, which is a 6-month limit on abortion. I also support the existing late-term abortion ban with limited exceptions for the life of the mother. But most importantly, I agree with President Trump that this is a states' rights issue, and I also think we should do everything we can to reduce the total number of abortions through access to reproductive care. If you support the New Hampshire law, why not support that at the federal level? This is such a potent political issue. As long as it's unresolved, I think in Washington, it's going to be a huge topic of discussion. So why not bring New Hampshire's law to the federal level? That's a good question, and I think in the simplest terms, what's right for California is different than what's right for South Dakota. And in New Hampshire, we have a common sense consensus on what's right for New Hampshire. So I'm very comfortable with that consensus. I support that consensus. In fact, I'm very proud of the consensus we have in our state. And I think I don't like the idea of the federal government intruding on that. So it's a states' rights issue, and I support our consensus. What about when a state tries to control what's going on in another state? You see some states, I think Idaho had a law like this, Texas might have one on the books as well, the idea of quote-unquote abortion trafficking, that if someone takes a minor or someone out of state to get an abortion, that they could be prosecuted, they could face jail time, even if the abortion is legal in that other state. Isn't it the role of the government to try to separate states from doing these kinds of overlapping things, particularly when they involve individual rights? As I said, my view is that this is a states' rights issue. And so what I care about are the rules and the laws of New Hampshire. And I think, as I said, we have a common sense consensus that makes sense for New Hampshire, and I support that. I think it's a states' rights issue, and I don't want to wade into other states.
As we wrap up here, obviously Republicans are on quite a losing streak in CD2. Annie Kuster had something to do with that, and she's gone, so it's a little bit more wide open this time around. But how do you change that streak, if you will, on the Republican side and get them from an L to a W?
Fantastic question, and thank you for asking that. I'm really, really excited about this race. I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to flip the seat. And I think as Republicans, it's important that we need the independents to win. And so as a party, I think it's important that we support a candidate that appeals to the independents. I've been on the campaign trail. You know, Adam, I'm a voter as well as a candidate. And the voter in me is looking for a common sense conservative like myself that can sway the independents. And I'm meeting with some independents on Tuesday evening to hear their thoughts and concerns, and I look forward to that. And so I'm excited about the race because I think I'm that candidate that can carry those independents, and I look forward to winning the Republican nomination.
All right, Bill Hamlin, we'll see you out there on the campaign trail. Thanks for coming in for Close Up.
Thank you.